It is Monday, January 13th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen. This is Slate Sports Podcast, and back with you again, I am Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I co-host the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. My panel and I have tons to go over on this fine Monday morning for you. The playoffs in not just the NFL, but college football too. If you like playoff football, wow, is this the time and the place for you? Also, the debut of a new golf league, trying something that hasn't exactly been tried before, though in a different sense has been tried for hundreds of years. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the day in women's athletics. Lindsay, how are you?
We had a little snow here in North Carolina. The Australian Open is on. Playoff football. I'm doing great. I'm delighted to hear it. And Ben Lindbergh, you are here as well. You are senior editor for The Ringer. You co-host the Effectively Wild Baseball podcast, and you, of course, join us here on Hang Up and Listen. How goes?
Goes well. That is all accurate. And last week we talked about how hopeless Manchester United was. They then knocked Arsenal out of the FA Cup. We also talked about the lack of recent warm weather winter classics in the NHL shortly before it was announced that the Winter Classic and Stadium Series games will be in Florida next year. So, which trends will we reverse this week?
You're welcome. Yeah.
We could probably sell a service like this for a healthy chunk of change if we applied it to the stock market, for example.
Yes, exactly. I guess probably if I were to invest more heavily in the stock market, the opposite of what I expected is what would occur.
Before we get into all of this fun business, as always, we want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One way that we like to do that over here is with a bonus episode. This week, we have a show for you about the scalding hot Cleveland Cavaliers and a burgeoning chase for history in the National Basketball Association. You can hear that episode as long as you are a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen.
Commanders off the upright, and it is in! They doink their way to the divisional round! Unbelievable!
I have seen it all now. I even get a divisional doink.
You just heard it. The Washington NFL franchise, now known as the Commanders, had not won a playoff game since 2005. That drought ended last night as we record this when Zane Gonzalez's buzzer-beating 37-yard field goal, only marginally more than a chip shot, in my opinion, looked like it was sailing right and then doinked off the upright and back through the uprights, going in rather than out to secure a road win against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that had been hosting the Commanders on this night. The Washington Post, they are calling that right upright already. Credit to Blue Sky user NBA Bo for that one. And Ben Lindbergh, let me tell you, I'm a subscriber to whatever the Commanders are putting on paper right now.
Well, I'm glad one of the Washington Posts is driving subscriptions as opposed to driving subscribers away. Oh. I know you teed me up to talk about the Commanders, and I will. But first, settle this one for me. Which is better, a doink that does go in or a doink that doesn't? Because we got one of each this weekend. Very important question.
Generally speaking, I'm pro good doink, the doink that goes in.
I love all doinks equally. It does not matter. A doink to end a game, a walk-off doink, or a doink, no. It's just one of the best sounds in sports.
It really is.
It's just so good. I can't even explain why. It's so stupid, but it's so good.
We're equal opportunity doink appreciators. I think it's just because kickers are so good, especially these days, that to see them doink one, it's very human. It's very relatable instead of having it go right through the uprights. They're dependent on chance too. And I was reminded of another famous doink from Washington sports, Howie Kendrick's go-ahead game-winning homer off of Will Harris in Game 7 of the 2019 World Series against the Astros off the foul pole, which also made a very satisfying doink. So really does depend on your perspective and your rooting interest, whether you want the doink to go one way or the doink to go another. But this team, this Commanders club, just keeps coming back and making pivotal plays right at the end of regulation or in overtime, which has happened 5 games in a row. And Jaden Daniels, so much for rookie quarterback. Will he be able to perform in the playoffs? He's been meeting the moment all year. Rookie quarterback, completely unfazed seemingly, and has had so many big moments and late drives.
Lindsay, as a Carolina Panthers fan, of course, but a longtime resident of DC, as was I, we both spent a lot of time there. Do you feel the level of kinship that I do with Commanders fans who sat through the Dan Snyder of it all and now have gotten to see what they're seeing this season?
Look, I will make anything about myself, so absolutely. It's just so much more enjoyable to root for this team. I mean, had a Dan Snyder team won a playoff game on a doink, I would have been despondent.
That's kind of a non-sequitur.
That would have never happened.
Yeah.
But it's so nice to be able to enjoy this team in the city of Washington, D.C. The district certainly does deserve some good vibes with everything else going on there this month. So I'm happy for them. There are talk about long-suffering fans. It's absolutely thrilling. And to see the vibe, I'm going to talk a lot about vibes today because I believe in them. And if you watch the post-game stuff with this Commanders team, the vibes are immaculate.
And I'm not going to say that the Lions are a good matchup for the Commanders or for anyone for that matter, but if you squint, you could sort of see it because Daniels has done really well against the blitz this year. I believe I read he has the third best QBR against the blitz. Credit to ESPN on that one. And the Lions blitzed constantly against the Vikings, as we discussed last week, to make up for injuries. Some of those injuries may have healed by the time the next game rolls around, but if you're looking for an upset candidate, you could do worse than the Commanders and Daniels against the Lions.
I think it's pretty clear that we're watching the start of a really special quarterback career with Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels has been a special player for a little while. He was the Heisman Trophy winner last year at LSU. But you really don't know what you're getting with any of these guys until you actually see them in a stadium in the NFL. And I think the obvious poise with which Jayden Daniels carries out his duties is the thing here. Like, that's the beef. That's why we're going to be talking about this guy. Football gods willing, because this is not the first really good rookie quarterback in Washington, and we all understand what can happen with injuries in this game. But I think we're going to be looking at this guy for a very long time because of how calmly he plays the quarterback position. We saw this on the fourth down go-ahead touchdown throw to Terry McLaurin when they were trailing by 4 in the fourth quarter with about 10 minutes to go in this game. Then the Buccaneers came back, tied it, and obviously Jayden then conducted the winning drive. This is clearly a league where, if you have the quarterback, you have the chance, and if you don't, you don't. And, I wouldn't say that having a decent quarterback is sufficient for the Washington Commanders because, Kirk Cousins played there for a little while. He was good, not great, but very good. And it wasn't enough, but I think you get Dan Snyder out of there. You get Jayden Daniels in there. Give him a receiver like Terry McLaurin, head coach like Dan Quinn, who knows a little bit about defense. And I'm not going to say the sky's the limit, but I agree. I think the upset possibility is there in Detroit. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to pick it, but this is a really solid team with a lot of runway ahead of it.
You mentioned the calm. I grew up rooting for the Yankees. I have since reformed. And I heard incessantly about Derek Jeter's calm eyes, which I believe was a phrase that was in a high school scouting report of Jeter, which was one of the qualities that his success in the postseason was attributed to. And frankly, he wasn't even that successful in the postseason. He was just a good player, period. And he just wasn't worse in the postseason, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. But it's rare that you actually see a professional athlete, a high-level athlete, look as if they are not calm, look as if they are feeling the moment. Now, there are plenty of times that a player will have an awful game. We could talk about Justin Herbert maybe in this segment at some point, but they don't always look as if they're flustered or as if they're anxious. And I'm a big believer just in general in players who get to this level. They have already been tested so many times, and professional sports is such a crucible, and just getting to that point even, I think, filters out, weeds out the people like us, probably, who would be just completely discombobulated by these moments. And so that's why I always have a hard time with the playoff narratives. This guy, he just can't perform at this moment, right? We hear this about Lamar and his lack of playoff success, which he certainly did not exhibit in the wild card round. And he hasn't historically. And that's the thing about Lamar Jackson. There's going to be so much conversation about Lamar versus Josh Allen and Ravens versus Bills and the MVP contender showdown and playoff narratives. Lamar has been super successful in the wild card round. And so you have to believe that he can perform under that bright light, but then the light gets just a little bit brighter. And that's the breaking point for him. This is always the problem I have with the playoff narrative, the unclutch choker idea, because so often a lot of those players who get saddled with that label, they are successful on that stage some of the time, just not always consistently. And so I always wonder about the psychology of that. Well, how did he handle himself that time, but not this other time? I think a lot of it just does come down to not having a great day at the wrong moment or a little luck, etc. And given enough opportunities, I always believe in the talent. And I expect that at some point that player will prove himself. But it's better to be Jayden Daniels and to never have anyone doubt you from the get-go.
I have a Jayden Daniels question for you, Alex. You know, he's 24. We talk about him like, you know, he is a rookie, but he's not that young in NFL quarterback terms. And I'm wondering, is this kind of a win for NIL and, you know, encouraging top talent to really stay in college and develop there and be a little bit more mature when you get to the pros? Or is this just Daniels would have just been successful no matter what, and he's just a special guy?
That's a really good question, Lindsay. I think I see where you're going, and I would answer it with maybe, but there's a couple factors to untangle with Jayden Daniels that I think are interesting. One of them is that he had an ideal growth environment at LSU. You know, he was able to come into his own in his Heisman Trophy season, throwing the ball to a group of players that included Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., who were both first-round picks, who were also two of the best receivers in the NFL right out of the box as rookies this year. And with a pretty well-designed offense that didn't win much because LSU has had trouble stopping anybody for a while, but where Jayden Daniels, after transferring over from kind of a dead program at the time at Arizona State, was able to come into his own. Mm-hmm. And, you know, is it possible that without the opportunity to earn a little bit of money in 2023 at LSU that he might have tried to go and play professionally earlier? It's possible. Yeah, I mean, he certainly improved his draft stock by leaps and bounds that last year at LSU. I do wonder how much this applies to the quarterback position in general, because big leaps like he made at the end of his college career are pretty rare. You know, typically if you have a quarterback who's not sure if he should turn pro, he's not going to then become a top 3 pick in the NFL. Yeah. Then it's like, you know, we're talking about this right now with a few college quarterbacks. They think they might be day 3 NFL picks. If you come back and you work yourself somewhere into the first round or the second round. But I do think what Jayden Daniels validates very clearly is it's nice when a player not only has time to develop in college, but also finds himself in a nice circumstance where he can stretch his legs a little bit and throw the ball at a high level to players who are going to be joining him at the NFL level. Ben, can I ask you something about the playoff thing that you brought up a moment ago?
Sure.
And then we can talk about non-commanders. Yeah. I also struggle with the can't do it in the playoffs thing, because in just about every player's case, the sample size is pretty small. Like if they'd had one better day, then the numbers would look a lot different, or the accomplishment resume would look a lot different. And really the only thing that I personally make an exception for is baseball, your primary vocation, where in general it's random, but at this point, Clayton Kershaw has pitched in 194 playoff innings, which is a full season, and his ERA is 4.5. I can buy that clearly something is weird with Clayton Kershaw that time of year. But that's because I've seen 200 innings from him. I've seen a full season. There's very, very few NFL quarterbacks there have been a few, and over a long enough career, Patrick Mahomes will certainly be one of them, who do play enough playoff games that maybe you can start to evaluate and think that the sample size isn't tiny. But that's certainly not the case for Lamar Jackson at this point.
Yeah, right. And of course, you're not going to get that big a sample if you suck in the playoffs, probably, right? So there's a bit of a skewed sample there, I guess. But yeah, Lamar, he's won the past 3 playoff openers. He has a QBR over 80 in those. He's completed 70% of his pass attempts, thrown 4 touchdown passes, 1 interception in those games. And then they keep playing, and that has been the problem for him. But it is hard for me to square that early round success with later round struggles. And then you're really just slicing and dicing these samples so small. Someone like Kershaw, again, I struggle with the psychology of it because Kershaw has had games in the playoffs where he looks like his usual vintage, excellent Hall of Fame self. And then many other times he has not. And so I just wonder if you're reduced to this kind of quivering, massive flesh and your knees are knocking together in the playoffs because of the pressure, then how do you ever perform? And clearly they do perform sometimes, even the players who get this reputation. But, he's done it long enough and has struggled enough that you can no longer write that off as, he's just hasn't gotten good bullpen support. He's had a bunch of balls bounce the wrong way for him. And again, I don't think it's because he's a coward. I think if anything, it's because he's too intense and maybe he gets too amped up for these games, which is, I guess, a way of choking, but not the way that most people conceive of choking, I think. Again, though, there have been so many players who have had this reputation, and if they keep getting chances, which is not a given, more times than not, they will eventually show that they can get it done.
There were other NFL playoff games this weekend. We mentioned the Ravens 28-14 over my Steelers, put about 300 rushing yards on Pittsburgh, dominant. Houston 32, Los Angeles Chargers 12. Justin Herbert 4 picks in that game. Eagles 22, Packers 10. Pretty comfortable for Philadelphia as that game got older. And Buffalo beat Denver 31-7. There's also a Monday night game being played in Glendale, Arizona, with the Rams as the home team against the Minnesota Vikings. But Lindsay, out of all of those not very competitive playoff games, which one formed the most compelling conclusion for you about the teams involved?
I don't know about huge, massive takeaways. I mean, I expected the Ravens to trounce the Steelers. Sorry, Alex. That was just not expected. That was just not a surprising statistic. Although it was a surprising statistic to see Mike Sando of The Athletic point out that the Steelers have the same number of playoff wins as the Jets over the past 8 seasons, 0. Which, considering they've had winning seasons for all those seasons, is I can see why things are a little bit tense and we're talking about Tomlin. But anyways, I actually thought that the biggest surprise I had was how great the Texans looked and how great CJ Stroud in particular looked. I was dealing with some family stuff and in a lot of family gatherings on Saturday. So we had the games on in the background. And every time I looked up, I was whoa, what is happening? The Texans, are they much better than I thought? And it's clear their defense just gave the Chargers, who, listen, this is forced in here, but do want to just give a shout out to everyone in the Los Angeles area right now. And I think the Chargers certainly had a lot going on other than football. And while nobody would talk about that as being an excuse for losing the game, it's part of the story of their week for sure. And part of the story of a lot of people's weeks, including Alex's. But, I just thought the Texans were really impressive. They won a weak division and had a really big struggle towards the end of the season and came in there and just looked absolutely dominant. Do I think they're going to beat the Chiefs? No, but I think it could be a fun game.
Yeah, and I guess their advantage that they might have, relatively speaking, in that matchup is the pass rush, which was so effective and has been for much of the season. Not a great offensive team, but they are good in that respect. And that matchup of pass rush against Chiefs tackles, that could be one way. Texans clearly still an underdog, but maybe that's a little edge, the way that we talked about Jaden's success against the blitz. You mentioned it, Lindsay. I was going to bring it up myself because how could we not? You're our resident Yinzer on the podcast, Alex. So where do you stand on the great debate of our times, other than whether a doink in is better than a doink out? Is Mike Tomlin helping the Steelers overachieve, or is he someone who can't get it done come playoff time, and thus there's a ceiling on this team as long as he's around?
Yes to both of your questions. He is helping them overachieve, and he is a limiter. Mike Tomlin is clearly, by any measure, one of the best coaches to ever come through the National Football League. He has, as is repeated this time every year, never had a losing season in coming up on 2 decades now. But I'd be fine if it was over, personally, as a fan of the team. Things end. Like, things end.
Except Steelers coaches, which just never end.
Things hit their expiration date. This just happens. And it does not mean that the next guy is going to be better. In fact, almost certainly, the next guy who coaches the Steelers, whenever that time comes, will not have the career there that Mike Tomlin has had. Almost certainly. And, you know, it's been a blessing to never have like your Hugh Jackson Browns tenure or your Adam Gase Jets tenure as a Steelers fan for many decades. It's been nice. I know what we have, but I think in the NFL, you're in purgatory if you are run the way the Steelers are run right now. Unfortunately, Mike Tomlin is too good for the Steelers to ever be bad enough to get a quarterback unless they really get lucky. Russell Wilson certainly is not it, as was made clear over their 5-game losing streak to end the year. So I could take it or leave it. I think Mike Tomlin is one of the best to ever do it, but obviously this is not working in the way that you want it to work. So whatever they decide, that's fine with me. I hope that he wears a Steelers quarter zip at the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
To wrap us up, I just want to give a shout out to the Eagles, A.J. Brown, who the games until we got to the Commanders, Buccaneers were a little boring. So you might have been second screening it, and he was too. He was on the sidelines reading the book Inner Excellence by Jim Murphy, which was written to train your mind for extraordinary performance and the best possible life. I absolutely love it. I just love it.
Yeah, I guess technically not second screening if you're reading a hard copy of the book. Second page, perhaps. Yeah.
My favorite piece of that was after the game, someone asked Jalen Hurts about it, and he said, you know, I've never seen him read. I've seen the book in his hand. That's a team that loves each other when they talk about each other like that to reporters.
Except they hate each other. And yet, like, they're both so likable, but it's clear they don't really get along together. And I love that because I love them both.
It was all of like a month ago.
Yeah. Remember when the Panthers broke
Brown
them?
Was very publicly unhappy.
Yeah. I will say there is the meme about LeBron whenever he's holding a book, he's opening it to the first page, which is less than convincing. So A.J. Brown at least was in the middle of that thing. So he was making it look convincing at least.
There will be more NFL playoffs throughout the next couple of weekends, and then they take a week off before the Super Bowl. We will surely talk about all of it as we proceed through this winter here on Hang Up and Listen. Up next, Ohio State and Notre Dame make us ask the question, do they even play college football in the South?
Get in on the playoff action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. You can score big by betting on touchdowns at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HANGUP. That's code HANGUP for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas, 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. The College Football Playoff National Championship is set. It'll be next Monday night. The Ohio State Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are going to duke it out for the title. Ohio State seems to make a thing of having a title run in the first year of a new playoff format. They won the inaugural 4-team playoff back in 2014, and they are now here in the first year of the 12-team structure. Meanwhile, Notre Dame had not won a major bowl game in my entire lifetime, but has now won both the Sugar and the Orange this year. Two blue blood programs, both accustomed to winning national championships in their long history, but trying to get back to the mountaintop for the first time in a while. Obviously longer for Notre Dame than for Ohio State. Narratives abound all over. Ryan Day at Ohio State is trying to win a title mere weeks after he was very possibly coaching for his job in their first round game against Tennessee, and the most hated man in Ohio at that time. Marcus Freeman is the head coach of Notre Dame. He's a former Ohio State linebacker. He is also both the first Black and Korean head coach to ever appear in a college football national championship game. Ben, what grabs you most between Ohio State's quest to finish off this weird year with a championship or Notre Dame's quest to get back to a place that it hasn't been in even longer than Ohio State's absence from the top?
Yeah, there's so many excellent aspects to this. I guess, both games, both teams came down to really the skin of their teeth here. And, you had to Texas very much in doubt until the fourth quarter, really until the Jack Sawyer scoop play. I don't think that Ohio State is that much better than Notre Dame than the almost double-digit spread would suggest, because, as mentioned, Texas really gave them a run for their money, and then Notre Dame's win was in doubt even later in its game, and Notre Dame has 13 wins in a row, so you might think, well, how could they lose? But they almost did. So there are really weaknesses that each could exploit. You have Ohio State's offense versus Notre Dame's defense, not that Ohio State's defense isn't dominant too. There's also, I think, just how this reflects on the college football playoff, which has been kind of a consistent talking point. We talked about how lousy the first round of the playoffs was and why that wasn't unusual. But this past week, we're down to the Final Four, and those games were great. Then again, I guess you could say that these final two, it feels like the marquee matchup. That is what you want, even though you don't have the top seeds in going into the tournament who are still alive here, right? You got two teams outside the top four that advanced to the championship game. And yet it feels like these are the two teams that deserve to be there. And it's kind of a clash of the Titans.
It is indeed. And those of us who grew up trying to figure out, who are the kind of arch villains in the sport, Ohio State, often a candidate. Notre Dame, often a candidate. If you're kind of a normie college football fan, you're looking for teams you don't like, you'd pick these two. Got to pick one, Lindsay Gibbs, in this championship game.
Look, I got to just stay rooting for my Irish. Are they the underdog? Big time. I think the opening line was, 10 points, 9 points, something like that. But I was absolutely, first of all, just bravo to both of those semifinal games. Both kept me up past my bedtime, and I wasn't even that mad about it. But after just seeing devastating loss after devastating loss, I don't know if devastating is even the right word, because that implies a closeness that was not always there for the big games that Notre Dame has been in. I'm still scarred from 2012 and that no show against Alabama. But I think that what we're seeing is a team that really just is finding a way to win. I didn't think Ohio State looked that impressive against Texas. They bit them, bit themselves? No, shot themselves in the foot. Is that the thing you're supposed to say?
You can bite yourself in the
I
foot.
don't know.
If you're flexible.
That sounds confusing. But sorry, everyone. But I think that we saw them make a lot of mistakes. We didn't see a lot of 3 and outs. It was just not it. I kept expecting Ohio State to take things to the next level in that game. And at the end, they kind of had to get not lucky, but Texas was right there on the 1 yard line, about to score. And I'm sorry to then get a fumble scoop 6. That's not the expected outcome of Texas at the 1 yard line. And so I just came out of this thinking Notre Dame is finding ways to win, and Ohio State is, I think, more vulnerable than they appeared in the trouncing of Oregon.
Yeah, and Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Will Howard's strength is not necessarily as a drop back passer. And so if you have an excellent secondary, as Texas did and as Notre Dame does, then that's maybe not an ideal matchup for him. And Texas doubled up on Jeremiah Smith, held him to 1 catch, I believe. And if Notre Dame looks at that and says, okay, here's the game plan that almost worked, maybe we can implement it even better. And they just did the same thing, more or less, in the Orange Bowl. Penn State's wide receivers had 0 catches, which was the first non-service academy example of a game this year when a wide receiver didn't have a single catch. So it seems like that's the blueprint. I'm not saying Jeremiah Smith's going to have 0 catches against Notre Dame, but if you want to kind of run back what almost worked for Texas here and just do it a little bit better than Texas did, it's conceivable that an upset could happen.
Yes, absolutely. Texas decided we are not going to get beat over the top by Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, the other really good Ohio State wide receiver, and they made Ohio State play an underneath game to beat them, and Ohio State was able to do that pretty narrowly, but I think you're exactly right. I think that Notre Dame, equally impressive to holding the Penn State receivers off the board, did a fine job on the best tight end in college football, Tyler Warren, number 44 for Penn State. Had a decent line, like 6 catches for 75 yards or so, but really had to work for it. There was an interception on a ball thrown to him that was taken off the board by a lousy, in my opinion, pass interference call. And they really made life difficult on the best weapon for Penn State. They've covered tight ends very well all year. I think that you should expect that they're going to handle Ohio State's receivers as well as you could. Not to say that, like you say, anyone's going to blank Jeremiah Smith. But where I think that leaves this game to be decided is the Ohio State running game against a pretty depleted Notre Dame defensive front. One of Notre Dame's best players, their defensive tackle, Riley Mills, is out. He's been out for a few weeks. He won't play in this game. They have another very good defensive tackle by the name of Howard Cross, who's also been hurt, though I think he is healthy enough to keep playing through the playoff. Can Ohio State, with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, their superstar running back duo, make hay that way in this game against a defensive front that is not at full strength? I think to some extent the answer is going to be yes, Ohio State can do that. Exactly how much, and by extension, how many points does Notre Dame need to keep this thing close in the fourth quarter, are the operative questions for the shape of this championship game, which will be played in Atlanta.
Yeah. Notre Dame last beat the Buckeyes in 1936, so it's been a while. The score in that game was 7-2, which I'm guessing will not be the score this time, but hey, you never know. And if Ohio State does pull it out, then the loss to Michigan gets reframed as the inciting event, the motivational moment, the thing that lit a fire under Ohio State, instead of a potentially fireable offense, which it seemed like it might be at the time. So a little hindsight, things look different. And we talked a lot about Ohio State as just a powerhouse and, peaking at the right time last week. I guess this is the second time since 2014 there's no SEC team in the title game. It's back-to-back Big Ten representatives for first time in a quarter century, something like that. So what does this say about the college football playoff then? Will we all just go home happy, at least as impartial, neutral rooters and observers from this first trial run, and say, yeah, this produced exciting games when it mattered and a deserving champion, and let's keep it going?
You know, I agree with something that I saw Victoria Zeller point out, that because this game's in Atlanta, I think it's a really nice opportunity for the northern schools to kind of grow college football in the South.
For sure.
like you'll have Ohio State fans, you'll have Notre Dame fans coming down there, and you can kind of show the people in Georgia, like, yeah, this is college football. Like, this is a great sport. Like, we love this in Indiana. We love this in Ohio. And, like, you don't play a lot of it in the Southeast. But if you watch the way Notre Dame and Ohio State play, maybe college football can actually kind of catch on in the American South. I don't know. We'll see. To answer your question in a less standoffish way, I don't think it means anything other than that the playoffs shook out this way this year.
Mm-hmm. But because it's the first time, that takes on added importance because people will make too much of it one way or another. So if we'd gotten a total dud or just upsets all the way and it felt fluky, then people would probably blow that up to mean much more than it actually did.
Well, I think that, to me, and we talked about this last week a little bit, I just do like that it gives you a chance to have that adversity in season and then come back from it, which usually any type of adversity, what is, when there's only 4 teams, you almost have to go undefeated to make it into, the top 4. And so I do think that, both teams had a very embarrassing loss on their record. And both teams were able to still, not let that ultimately define them. And I like that. And I think it shows that that's, to me, the biggest strength of expanding the college football playoff is that you can't have a lot of mistakes in there. You're not starting from scratch, but it does give you the chance to see a team's resilience in ways that college football has not had really a showcase for in the past. That's not really always been able to be part of the narratives in college football seasons, because if you had a humiliating loss, it's very unlikely you're going to make it to the national championship game.
As a famous big screen boxer once said, it's not about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Unless getting hit once eliminates you from contention, more or less, which now you actually have an opportunity to rebound.
I think we're all trying to figure out what we should do with all of this, because it still just doesn't feel normal that Ohio State can faceplant on its own field against Michigan and then still win the national championship. Yeah. There is some recent precedent for this. Alabama lost the Iron Bowl to Auburn in 2017 in the 4-team format and then won the national championship, but it's still really weird. Lindsay, I actually don't like that Ohio State can do that, but I accept that it's part of the game, part of the price that is paid for more teams to be able to sort of keep up the illusion about national championship contention for longer, which keeps more games feeling big in this playoff-ified world that we live in. And so I'm just okay with it. But, in the world that I like, Ohio State loses to Michigan for a second loss of the year. Like, see ya. Yeah. That's it. Ryan Day will have to deal with being the most despised man in the state of Ohio for another 365 days. It's okay that that's not what it is. It's fine. And I think the cream having the chance to rise to the top, certainly, as you say, brings something new. It is nice to see the resilience, but it still doesn't feel, it's like an unfamiliar pair of pants. I'm still trying them on. I'm still not exactly sure how I like these, but better get comfortable because we are not going back to a smaller playoff. In fact, we will, if anything, only go to bigger and bigger playoffs over the long sweep of the future.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that I, want, for example, in Alabama to have been in the playoffs this year. I was very fine with their exclusion with the 3 losses and the 24-3 loss to Oklahoma. That's disqualifying. That's, okay. But I guess I like the narratives. I like a little bit of ups and downs. And you know what else I like? I like this statistic. In 3 seasons, Marcus Freeman has now won as many postseason games as Brian Kelly did in 12 seasons. So, as head coach of Notre Dame, and he has a chance for one more. Yes, everyone, I know, acknowledge that there's an asterisk there because, there's been multiple this season, more than Brian Kelly would have ever had a chance to win, but I don't think he would have even gotten there. He went to LSU to win. And I hope he has a good time on January 20th.
Yeah, none of us wants to be defined by our worst day, our worst podcast, our worst football game, whatever it is. Just give him a mulligan. Let him move on.
Actually, one of the big stakes of this national championship game is that if Ryan Day wins this game, Brian Kelly will replace him, I would argue, as the definitive, how did you not win a championship with those guys, coach. Just talked about it. Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., just on last year's team. This has been Ryan Day's cross to bear over the past few years because of the litany of incredible Ohio State players who have come through that program and been part of, in particular, the offense at the same time. They had C.J. Stroud, now a very good, though having a tough year, NFL quarterback with Garrett Wilson and Jamison Williams and Chris Olave, and NFL fans all know these guys' names, and there are more, and they couldn't get over the hump. Ohio State might be about to do it. And that would leave everyone's skepticism trained on one man in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It would be Brian Kelly. Maybe Brian Kelly, like me and like the two of you, I believe, watched some golf the other day. Up next, we'll talk about a new golf league that is pitching a value proposition that I think is very interesting. It's what if golf, but not.
It's time for another round.
May you live in interesting times.
Well, I don't think we have a choice, Mary.
Trump's back, and this time he's got way fewer restraints and a literal playbook for MAGA-ifying the United States.
For most of human history, people have lived under kings and queens, and not everybody believes that there's anything wrong with that.
All this can be overwhelming, but you can't afford to not pay attention. That's where What Next comes in. We are a new kind of daily news podcast, fast enough to keep up and careful enough to take a step back and think.
Democracy is not a thing that we did and now have to protect and dust off. It's a thing that we still have it within ourselves to accomplish.
The next 4 years are going to be a roller coaster. You need someone there to help you figure out what next. Follow and listen to What Next wherever you get your podcasts.
Last week marked the debut of a new golf league and a new golf format altogether. TGL, which stands for Tomorrow's Golf League, though you could be forgiven if you thought it stood for Tiger Golf League, had its first match in Florida. The season will run through the winter, ending in March, a few weeks before the Masters, and it has an intriguing proposition. The golf is played indoors in an incredibly tricked out, technologically marvelous domed arena. Players hit into a screen, playing on virtual holes that are often nothing like what they would encounter on the PGA Tour. The putting green is real, or at least real-ish. It spins around and changes slope depending on the hole. There is real grass, real chipping, real bunker play, but it's all in this very new age practice facility type structure. The competition is a mix of singles play and team play, and it's paced nicely, taking only about 2 hours for a single broadcast window, which is also a match. Many of the best players in the world are present, including Rory McIlroy, who along with Tiger Woods got this thing started with the help of some deep-pocketed investors. ESPN broadcasts it. It's a nice feather in the cap for the PGA Tour, whose players populate these events. I was interested in the first match because I wanted to see it, but the actual competition got a bit stale to me pretty quickly, in part because there were no stakes. The players didn't seem to be too worried about not playing well, and if I just wanted to watch golfers messing around for fun, I could already do that on YouTube or Instagram or really anywhere on the internet that I wanted. Lindsay, did TGL's first night do it for you?
Well, I did end up watching about a full hour of it, which I think does not speak highly of me. I don't know that that's the best reflection of my taste. Listen, I do love golf, and I also have a very short attention span. So you would think something like this would be really up my alley, and maybe it will become up my alley. I do have tough time adjusting to new things, new formats, absorbing new rules, change is hard, and I applaud innovation. I also, applaud something that is, golf is not the most climate-friendly sport, and I think with what's going on in the world today, there are reasons to want to get any sport played underneath a dome right now. However, I just didn't think this was great. Like you said, Alex, it did not do a great job of storytelling, the broadcast. It assumed you knew all the guys. It didn't tell you much about them. And then you're supposed to just really be enjoying their banter and their camaraderie. It was wild to me that Tiger or Rory, the two names who are both on teams, were not playing in this opening night match.
Yes.
Like, what are we doing here? I didn't tune in to see Tiger Woods in the broadcast booth, and it just was strange. And I put this on Blue Sky, and I realized that this is just, me being maybe Miss Debbie Downer in the corner, but it was pretty inexcusable and unfathomable to me that women were not involved in this. I mean, it just seems like golf is a sport that has so many, that has a thriving LPGA circuit. I mean, not as thriving as the PGA, of course, but it has Nelly Korda, Rose Zhang. It has, names and co-ed sports. It's something that more sports are trying to become. And it just seems like if you're starting something new in 2025, something that is part technology, part real golf, I just would think for the innovation factor, the buzziness of it, the publicity even, you would add a woman to the teams. And even, if it's not 2 and 2, even if it's just one, that was just kind of really bizarre to me. I did hear they are in talks with the LPGA, but I mean, this tour has been in the works for like 4 years now. So
yeah, it was supposed to start a year ago, but weather messed up the dome in a hurricane a year ago. So they delayed it until this past week.
And you mentioned in your write-up for Slate, Alex, most male professional golfers have the personality of wax paper, which is also an impediment to enjoying this. And I thought, well, maybe that won't turn out to be true. Maybe we just don't get to see and hear their personalities in their natural habitat. And here they'll be mic'd up and we'll get this great access. And nah, I'm not sure it totally changed your your take on the personalities here. Maybe they just have to sort of settle into it. But between that and, yes, the fact that Tiger and Rory weren't playing, which I also thought was weird, and then no live golfers and some of the other big names were not there. It was a little lacking in star power. This really kind of feels like a confluence of a lot of the trends we've been talking about because, this trend toward new leagues springing up in the offseason of other leagues, which we discussed with Unrivaled, the women's basketball league, which tips off later this week. Now we're getting TGL. So again, there's just so much appetite for content, stuff to watch, stuff for people to bet on. There is just no off-season. You've always got to have some gimmick going. And that's what we've talked about with altcasts and alt settings for games. You always got to mix things up and different format, and it'll be played in a new environment. And, you tune in to see it once at least just for the novelty value. And I did enjoy it on that level, at least for a while. It just wore off fairly quickly. And it's tough to judge any of these new ventures by the very first time out. When I was watching Monday Night Raw on Netflix, their first broadcast on that streaming service, they pull out all the stops and all these bells and whistles, and it's packed with celebrities. And it's just hard to know to gauge whether that's going to be reflective of the week-to-week experience. And in some ways, pulling out all the stops might make it more entertaining. In other ways, it might actually not be beneficial because it's just larded up with a lot of promotion and self-congratulation and interviews about TGL. That sort of sapped some of the momentum from this broadcast, I think, was just that we were constantly hearing from people who weren't playing, just sort of sitting on the sidelines discussing how this all happened. And maybe you kind of cut out some of the fat, which is the point of TGL, or one of them, right? That's yet another trend that this reflects, is the desire to streamline things. You know, we're all just pulled in many different directions and attention spans and entertainment options competing for our attention. And so we've seen this in many sports too. You know, it reminds me of T20 or T10 cricket or rugby sevens or baseball 5, just these sort of stripped down versions of sports that we know and love, but also maybe wish were over a little bit faster. And pace of play, that's an issue with golf too. So that was one way in which I think TGL did actually improve the product, just by speeding it along.
I just think one thing should be noted. It didn't help that there was actually no tension in this match, because the Bay Golf Club, why they're named after cities that they are not playing in and do not have any connection to, we can discuss maybe later. But the Bay Golf Club defeated the New York Golf Club 9-2. There was no, they raced out to a lead. There was no tension over who was going to win. And again, it's a question of stakes. They have decided not to highlight money at all. I think the owner of the league, one of the owners, was saying, I think people are sick of hearing about how much money professional golfers get, LIV and PGA Tour and all these exhibitions, the match. They do really forefront money in the promotions and in the stakes. And so you didn't hear a mention of prize money at all throughout the broadcast. It was reported that it's, I think, $9 million for the winners at the end of the season. I don't know what they're getting per game. But that also, I don't really care how much richer they get, but that's some tangible stakes too that I thought it was interesting weren't there.
It's not clear to me why any of us watching should care about this action at all, for the reasons you lay out, because there's no rhyme or reason to the teams. I mean, you mentioned it. The Bay team, for example, has nobody who's from the Bay Area. It's 3 international players and a guy from Denver. They don't play there. They all play, every match in this league is played in Florida, in this dome. The players don't seem to really care. Like, you hit a bad shot, and Matt Fitzpatrick is a U.S. Open champion. He's giggling when he hits a bad shot because this isn't that serious. And they have no real reason to care. If the players don't really care, we won't really care. And it does feel like we're being sold something. I thought one of the most damning moments of the night was when ESPN came back from a commercial break, and Marty Smith, the ESPN sideline reporter, is holding a microphone in the face of Xander Schauffele, who's one of the best players in the world. He won 2 majors last year. And Marty asks him one question. It's barely even a question. It's mainly just like a setup, asking about why Xander Schauffele made some equipment alterations this year. It's looked really suspect, like as if it had been a setup so that Xander Schauffele could do exactly what he did, which is praise Callaway, his equipment sponsor that pays him a lot of money, for how great their new product line is that's helping him maximize his golf game. There were no follow-up questions. That was it. We got back to the action. Tiger and Rory being at the center of this, it being inextricable from the context of the past few years in men's elite pro golf, where we know this is all an arms race. And there's a reason it's only PGA Tour players here, right? This is supposed to sort of be a carrot for players to remain on the PGA Tour. You can do this in the off season. It just felt like we were being treated as dunces as the audience. And I didn't like that at all. Like, you posited no reason why I should care. The tech was awesome. Mm-hmm. And Ben, you're right. Like, it was quick. The holes are kind of cool because they're not real. So you can hit over an active volcano. Mm-hmm. That's fun. Mm-hmm. I'm cool with that. But it's not going to keep me coming back. Like, I saw it for 2 hours and that was enough.
Yeah, it reminded me of the ill-fated Overwatch League in esports, where they tried to have these geolocated teams, except that each of the teams, at least initially, was just playing in a studio in Burbank. And so it was hard to form any real attachment to those teams, locally speaking. I would actually be okay if they leaned into the silliness of this and just made it weird golf and gave up on trying to have stakes. They could go one way or the other, but if they're not going to have stakes, okay, fine, just make it strange. That's okay too. And we've seen various efforts to do that. You have the match, the head-to-head series of exhibitions on TNT, and you have the PGA Tour maybe switching the Tour Championship to a bracket-style tournament with head-to-head play. lean into that even more. I liked that there was some heckling and some booing and some cheering, even though it was sort of a restrained, night one crowd. I'd like to hear more of that. Like, give me some trash talk, in honor of Happy Gilmore 2. We need more "you suck, jackass" out there. Like, tennis players, golf players, they need perfect silence to perform. Give me a break. Show some mental toughness. This is not an orchestra recital. Let's perform under duress with people booing you and yelling at you. So that I would like. And also, there are some aspects of this that were kind of weird. Like, they have the hammer, which is a hole worth 2 points, not one. And then there's an overtime with a closest to the pin competition. And you mentioned the active volcano, but I'd like to see more of that. Just make it like an elaborate mini golf course, basically. Give me some windmills. Yeah. Give me some live gators, on the course. I'm a video game guy, give us like fan created holes, right? Like let there be some viewer participation. Make it like a Super Mario Maker or some other game with fan made levels where you have mods that become super popular, just have the public design really elaborate, convoluted, wacky courses and then see how the players do there, right? So it's imaginative, but it doesn't go far enough in that direction. It's kind of still in between. Is this real and serious and professional, or is it wacky? And I think you have to pick a lane.
I don't think it goes far enough in making itself feel a little dangerous, or at least a little weird, because the screen, of course, you can have whatever you put on there, but we all know that you're still hitting off of the most sterile environment possible. You're in this climate-controlled dome surrounded by very expensive things, just hitting the ball into a screen. Like, I've watched Jordan Spieth hit the ball from a cliffside in such a way that he could have died, and it was ridiculous that he did that. I've watched the same player hit a flop shot at the Ryder Cup where he almost threw himself down a hillside into a Great Lake. You're not getting that here. And so what I see once the ball hits the screen and becomes a simulation better be really interesting. Mm-hmm. Like really, really, really interesting. Lindsay?
Yeah, I wanted the green, which is real-ish. They actually putt on the green, so it goes from tee shot to all being in the simulation to then the actual green, and it rotates. And I really wanted it like move while they were putting or something, just like yes. Really crazy. Like I guess I got to the point where I wanted like a mini golf experience. Do you know what I mean? Like where you're bringing out like actual bells and whistles and leaning into that, the kitschiness of it a little bit. But it was weird. It was weird.
Yeah, and yet not weird enough simultaneously. But it's a really impressive high-tech facility. It reminds me a little bit of the volume that they film all the Star Wars shows on now, where it's just the studio with the wraparound screens. And so you don't actually have to film on location because everything's kind of done in camera on these screens. And in theory, that opens up all sorts of possibilities. And at first it was kind of cool when they started making the Mandalorian on there and this actually looks kind of real. And, it saves them time and effort and expense, etc. But then as it wore on, you can kind of tell when something is filmed on the volume, the thrill wears off a little bit, and you actually yearn for filming on location and practical effects. You want Andor, you want to be in some Scottish hill or something. And when I watch golf, which, full disclosure is not that often, but when I do, or when I grew up watching it, when my dad was watching it, you do it for the little glimpse of nature and to hear the birds chirping and see the water running and all of that. Like it's a nice sort of pastoral scene. Although I did appreciate that the screen is far enough away that you can actually kind of judge the trajectory of the ball. It's like 35 yards before the ball hits the screen. So you do get a bit of an appreciation of the path of the shot. It's not just fully simulated and extrapolated. The last point is that, and Lindsay alluded to this, when I first heard about this idea, and maybe it's because we're just awash in natural disasters, sometimes literally, I did think about the dystopian environmental angle of this. Is this kind of a trial run for golf for the way that all sports are headed? Are we all just going to be headed indoors to protect ourselves from the heat and the lack of water, etc.? And, no sport really is more susceptible to that than golf. And of course, there are environmental concerns about keeping courses watered. And depending on the area, there's a lot of objection to that. And so you certainly would lose something if you were to move golf indoors, just as you would in some sort of survivalist bunker in various post-apocalyptic scenarios. But maybe this is the way that things are headed, unfortunately. Till we figure out this whole climate change problem, it's just going to be more and more untenable to play sports the way that we're accustomed to playing them.
You're not wrong. I did watch this first night of this new league as the wildfires here in Southern California were beginning.
Yeah.
And that juxtaposition is, well, there are certain, let me put it this way. There are certain sporting events that you will always remember where you were when you watched them. And in a bizarre way, this one will certainly be one of those. No Afterball this week, and that's all for this episode, but we will be back with one in very short order. We also have a bonus show that is live right now about the Cleveland Cavaliers and their pursuit of history in the NBA. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts. Just click Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen to podcasts. The episode is available right now, and we will see you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup. You can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer doing a great job is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.